I ended the last portion of this lecture talking about the differences of qualitative, quantitative, or excuse me, quantitative, qualitative, and rhetorical research and researchers. And as you look at these, I just wanted to show you again, as we're coming back into it, the way there is overlap and difference between these. You see really that rhetoric or rhetorical research ends up being the furthest away from quantitative research. There's some overlap with qualitative, but sometimes qualitative is more like quantitative. There are some places such as sample and generalizability where I show you there's a continuum, right, and how quantitative rhetorical research methods really fit in opposite ends of the continuum. You don't have to memorize this portion of the chart here at these bars, but as I moved from where we just were talking about these methods, moving forward, I want to emphasize again the way that the research methods, there's a variance in them, and sometimes they vary by category, and sometimes they vary by degree. That was all. I just wanted to demonstrate that to you. So the question then is, what does rhetorical research do? So rhetorical research analyzes public communication. There it is. It analyzes public communication. We talked about public communication last time. I think that's relatively clear, right? And we focus very much as rhetorical researchers on the relationship between text and society. You could say text and audience, or artifact. I say text here, text and artifact being interchangeable terms, or I believe them to be. Some argue about that, but that's what we're not going to get into at the moment. But the relationship between text and society, or text and audience, but really I want to talk about text and society. So again, that Reagan example, how does Reagan ask us as this U.S. society, as those looking at the U.S., how does he ask them to think about space exploration, what the U.S. has done? So that artifact, that speech, and the people who are receiving it. So I'm saying society here, but it's also very much about audiences and how they are impacted in very broad way, right? Concentrating on how research or how receivers are asked to see the world. That's an important emphasis there. How are receivers asked to see the world? I think I've emphasized this in that lecture on Wednesday, that rhetoric is very much about asking people to see the world in a certain way. And so as a rhetorical researcher, you're concentrating on how are we as an audience, how are we as society, because those are the receivers here, how are they asked to see the world, right? How are they asked to think about space exploration? How are they asked to think about the work that NASA does? How are they asked to think about the United States in comparison to another global power involved in the space race? Right? And so broad consequences of meanings, I touched on this just a moment ago, right? So consequences or outcomes of a message in a very broad way. What we're not doing is what you might do in mass communication, which is receiver studies. People who listen to this sort of music, are they more or less aggressive? Are they more or less likely to do or believe a certain thing after having heard the song? Those are receiver studies. We really don't do that. We're talking about the broad consequences. How does this song ask us to think about men and women and their relationships to each other? How does this song ask us to think about acceptable expressions of emotion for men, for women? Right. So what are these broad consequences? Right? Because there are consequences to how you ask us to think about, with the Reagan example, how you have to think about space exploration. There are consequences there, right? It's looking for support. It's seeing those as heroes. It's seeing then the continuance of space exploration or the space program at NASA as being necessary, right? As a way to honor the dead, right? So that's a broad consequence rather than looking at, after people heard the speech, were they more or less likely to support the space program? That's not quite what we're doing. Just these broader, what is being encouraged here? How do we see society responding or being asked to respond? Again, never conclusive, right? So what does rhetorical research not do? It doesn't rate speeches. A thumbs up, a thumbs down, good, bad, 3 out of 5 stars, right? Not really a beat I can dance to, right? That's not what it does. It is not rating Reagan's speech as being a good speech or a bad speech. This film as being a good movie or a bad movie. That's not what a rhetorical critic does. Right? It does not emphasize your own reactions and feelings. That movie, it just stirred my emotions. The song made me cry. Not really what we do. Now, we are interested in, right? We are interested in when you have that emotional reaction, thinking about what brought about that emotion, what about that artifact or text brought about that emotional reaction, and talk about that as being an element in the text that seems to stir emotion, right? But it's not about you reflecting on what was your own experience with it, right? Expressing your opinion about the topic, right? I disagree with what Reagan said. Not really what we're doing here, right? It's not about whether you agree or disagree, right? That's not what it is. So just let that go right now. You may well write about people or analyze artifacts that you find very troublesome or problematic. I often do, actually. Investigating the speaker's claims. There's a little bit of an asterisk here, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But what the speaker said, is it true or not true? That is the work of a journalist, and that's good, important, socially valuable work, investigating the veracity, the truth of claims that are being made. Is a speaker saying things that are true? Is the film depicting things that are accurate? That's that's really a fair thing to discuss. Just not as a rhetorical critic. Does that mean we don't care about reality and truth? No, 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 no. I'm not saying that at all. Not even a little bit. But what I'm saying is that when you look at a speech, you might point out the speaker makes a claim, which, by the way, is false. But that claim is important because then it stirs up people to anger, right? So again, so you would say, of a president, right? The president used false claims to stir up the anger of one group against another, right? So they're false claims, but the point is not going through the speech line by line, true or false, true or false, true or false. You may observe that claim was false, but then how does that false claim help, function, hinder the message that's being conveyed? And last, measure audience effects, and we've talked about this already, so that's why there was an asterisk there, right? Those who heard the speech were more likely to whatever. After seeing the movie, people were likely to, right? Not really what we do, but we do talk about the broad consequences, right? Movies like this encourage us to see real heroes as those who do blank. Movies like this ask us to see financial success as being the result of X, right? Those are broad things as opposed to media effects, which very much looks at things like when people play violent video games, are they more violent or not? As opposed to saying, in these violent video games, what is seen as being entertainment? What sort of violence is seen as entertainment? What are those types of acts of violence? Against whom are they being committed? Who is committing those? How is the player asked to feel about that? That sort of broader, what were the effects of that very broadly? So I end with this part of this lecture, or really, well, I guess really this lecture on what is rhetoric, what is rhetorical criticism, about the two ways that we can see things, or that we see things. There's the personal and the rhetorical. So I'm going to show you the photo that my wife and I used for we sent out Christmas cards, right, holiday time. The photo that we used in, would have been 2012. So this is the photo we used, right? So Wesley Berkeley, have personal reactions to this photo. So first, I see the pond behind us. This is in our backyard of our old house, or I should say the last house we had. I see that pond that just that summer I had put in. I mean, I dug it out with a shovel, my very own self. I put those blocks into place with these delicate little hands, right? I see that, right? As I'm looking at this, I see the pearls that Ivy's wearing, those pearls I gave her as a wedding gift. So I see that. I think about the rings on her hands, and the days I put the engagement ring on her hand, the day I put a wedding ring on her hand. I think about that. I also see something in this photo you don't see, or know something in this photo that you don't know, right? Just by looking at the photo. It was only a week or two before this photo was taken, we found out that Ivy was pregnant with our first child. So that's part of what I see this, what I think of, and I know. I know who's taking the photo. It's a family friend. His name was Eddie, and Eddie would die about a month and a half later. We knew he was very ill. This was taken on Thanksgiving Day. I remember that day. Right, so those are all very personal reactions. Rhetorically, so if I weren't me looking at this, right? But you looking at this, you might offer certain observations about this photo and what it's doing. There's a lot of issues of class going on here. Class in terms of how we are dressed. There is the conveyance of a class status by the string of pearls, right? To me, it's like, oh, it's my wedding gift to her. But as a rhetorical critic, the way that the woman is dressed, right, that she wears a string of pearls, that there is this, right, that there is the diamond ring on the hand, right? The setting, you may not know whose backyard it is, but the fact that it's a sign, that's it's a sort of classed setting, right? I mean, it's not, um, we're not sitting, well, in any number of places, right? You know what I'm saying, right? There's a certain sort of setting we have here. We might talk about the way that this photo is a sort of celebration of heterosexuality. This is not me at all trying to promote any sort of homophobia. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that, but it's love, but also it is admittedly an image of heterosexual love. My wife and I are of opposite sex, and we're together in a marriage, right? But the way that, but this heterosexual love and the signs of bliss, the way that my back arm is concealed behind her, but my hand is there on her knee, just covering up her hand, that we're leaning in together. Right, so we could talk about the way it's conveying domestic heterosexual bliss, class status. We could talk about issues of whiteness in terms of the way we've presented ourselves, right? Those would all be rhetorical choices and ways of looking at this rhetorically, right? And really, if you wanted to, you could look at perhaps, it would be sort of interesting, but a collection of Christmas cards that have been sent out by people and talk about what are the elements in family photo Christmas cards. What are those common elements? And by the way, there's an article that I might have you read. No, we don't do generic really here anymore. Yeah, but actually about family photos. There's a brief article, a reading on family photos I sometimes have my students read. But anyway, so that's how we look at things. There's the personal and the rhetorical. And obviously in this class, rhetorical criticism, we should look at things in a way that is rhetorical. So why rhetorical research? This is where I'm bringing it home. We're going to consider the implications of the choices made. I think I've touched on this pretty well, but just want to make sure that line is there in your notes, right? As rhetorical critics, we do research to consider the implications of the choices made, the way that an event is described, people are described, how people are situated. We're interested in the implications of that. What does that ask us to believe about certain people, see certain people, think about certain acts, right? We're also trying to identify the rhetors, right, the speaker or the creator of that message, which may be an entity, as we talked about last time. That was a nice discussion of values and worldview, right? So what is this person's value and worldviews, and how do, what are the implications of that, right? Their perceptions of the world and life, right? So how do they describe certain problems? They see it as being because of the infestation of certain people, or they see it as being a disease within us that we need to treat. That's about, so it's about ourselves or other people coming in and we now have to push out, right? What's that perception, that worldview, right? A lot of this is about asking, who are we encouraged to be? As you think about entertainment media, think about, what are you asked to value? Who are you encouraged to be?